All right, so our last class that we are going to, our last subject of our kind of overarching Judges theme is going to be Gideon. And we skipped over Gideon when we went to Samson, but now we're going to go back to Gideon. Gideon, the story of Gideon happened relatively early on, most likely. Now, you know, finding dates and times for this kind of stuff can be difficult. But we'll look at a couple things. So we're going to go relatively quickly through this. It's going to be a very general overview. We'll touch on a few things, but first thing we're going to do, we're going to take a look at some of the background information. When did this take place? Where did it take place? We're going to set the story, right? One of the worst things you can do is just kind of jump in with the story and not give anybody any clues as to, you know, what the surrounding area was like or what the time frame was. So we'll look at that. Israel's troubles. What was going on during the time of Gideon? I'll give you a hint. It wasn't great. 3, the sword of the Lord. Gideon is going to be prompted by an angel to take matters into his own hands and to save the people of Israel, particularly the tribes of Manasseh, Zebulun, and Ephraim. And just keep that in mind as well. And then, you know, as we go through, we'll be looking at lessons for us. So this should take us to the end of our class for this morning. Questions, comments on our itinerary for today? What's your itinerary?
No, it looks great.
Okay, thank you. I was just wondering if you knew what itinerary was.
No.
Okay. All right, very good. Very quickly, our recap for this morning. All of these stories primarily are going to take place during the late Bronze Age, particularly around the collapse. And in fact, as we already talked about, it was this late Bronze Age collapse that is going to allow the children of Israel really to come up into the land of Canaan and take over the hill country. But, you know, Egypt was having major problems during this time. We're going to look at a couple archaeological sites that show that the Egyptians were in such disarray and were dealing with their, you know, the sea peoples coming from other places, that they withdrew from Canaan. So they had controlled Canaan for hundreds and hundreds of years. And because of this collapse that was going on during this time, they didn't have the manpower, you know, to kind of, you know, keep control of Canaan. So they left Canaan. And again, you know, history hates a vacuum, right? People are looking like, hey, there's no Egyptians in here controlling this area. Let's go. There's free land everywhere. And that's really what happened. And during this time, the land of Canaan, going to be known as the land of Israel, was in complete chaos. You had different peoples coming from all over the place trying to get into this really, you know, it's like the Wild West almost, you know, for a good analogy. You know, the authorities at the time, Egypt is no longer there. Everybody's doing whatever they want to do. They're trying to get more land. They're fighting other tribes, fighting other people. So just keep that in mind. So major migration of people across the Mediterranean and also into the land of Canaan as well. So you have people coming from the Mediterranean moving east. And during this time with Gideon, we're going to have people moving from the west, or from the east to the west, okay? And this is where the, you know, the Midianites come in, all right? And so civilization as we know it is going to take decades to kind of reorder itself and kind of settle things down. And just, you know, there's a lot of reasons for the late Bronze Age collapse. Most likely it was environmental. You know, there was some kind of catastrophe. There's different kind of archaeological sites that, you know, kind of lead us to think that there was like a major volcano and other earthquakes that are going to cause mass famine in this particular area. And if there isn't any food, you're going to go to a place where there is food. You know, the land of milk and honey, right? It wasn't just I believe it wasn't just the Hebrews that were interested in this land. There were other people that were very interested in it as well. Okay, particularly if you've spent the last, you know, 6 months to a year on a ship looking for, you know, viable, fertile land. All right, let's get into it. So, the account of Gideon can be found in Judges 6 through 8, and we're going to be looking at these two these two chapters primarily. Let's talk briefly before we get into the account here in Judges. Let me just turn to it here. Okay, let's talk about Midian. Midian is going to be the main protagonist. What does protagonist mean? Troublemaker, the bad guy, right? The baddie. So Midian is going to be the group of people that is going to invade the land of Canaan. And we'll talk about that a little bit. So where was Midian located? Midian is located, as you can see from the map up there, the northwest coast of the Arabian Peninsula. So you can see where the Sinai Peninsula is, right over there across the Gulf of I think it's Aqaba? Yeah, is going to be Midian. The Midianites were related to Israel. Midian was the son of Abraham and his wife Keturah. Okay, so there is a direct connection between the Midianites and the Israelites. They were really, brothers, cousins, whatever. Yahweh is going to reveal himself at the burning bush in the land of Midian, right? So there's that connection. The burning bush incident with Moses. Remember, Moses is going to flee to the land of Midian. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, was a Midianite. So there is this really intimate connection between the Midianites and the children of Israel. But that's really not going to matter in our story. The Midianites, even though they're related to Israel, they're not going to care about that. They're going to take whatever they want. And we know that Joseph is going to be sold down into Egypt to a band of Midianites. They're labeled Midianites, but they're also labeled Ishmaelites as well, which is interesting. Again, that close connection between the Hebrews, the Israelites, and the Midianites. They were cousins, right? Semitic peoples. And so they're going to move from the northwestern part of the Arabian Peninsula, and they're going to move northwest up into the land of Canaan. And they're going to do that because there's stuff there. There's stuff that they want. And they're looking, obviously, to expand as well. And they see that there's a vacuum up in this area, and they're like, hey, let's take advantage of this. And it's not just going to be a few people. It's going to be a lot of people, thousands and thousands of people. All right. So I want to kind of, this is going to be a big rabbit hole. It's going to be a little rabbit hole. It's going to be a mine hole, actually. See what I did? Okay. Let's talk about the Timnah Valley. This is in the south of Israel, around the area of Eilat. Anyone been to Eilat? Okay. You've been to Eilat, Jason? And you didn't like it?
Well, it's a long drive.
Okay. Did you like it, Aaron?
I loved it.
Okay. We'll talk later. So Eilat is actually a very long drive from where Jerusalem is, but it's like a seaside resort, right? It's nice?
Yeah, it's like kind of like Miami.
Oh, okay. All right. Why wouldn't you like that? It's weird. It's weird that you don't like that.
A lot of snorkeling.
Okay. All right. Very good. All right. So in this area of Eilat, called the Timnah Valley, there is copper mines that have been mined for thousands of years. Human beings from different peoples, different tribes have been mining this area for copper. Remember, copper was the main ingredient or the main metal used making metals, right? First it was just straight copper, and then they took copper and mixed it with tin to get bronze, right? So that's why we have the Copper Age, the Bronze Age, then the Iron Age. And it really has to do with what type of metals ancient man was using to make weapons, but also tools, okay? And so copper was very important all the way through this time period. You know, if you don't have copper mines, you can't get the copper out of the ground, obviously, and you can't make these tools and weapons that you need. Anyways, for hundreds and hundreds of years, Egypt is going to control this area, these copper mines. Okay, Egypt is going to play a major part in, obviously, the story of Canaan, because they're going to control it for a long period of time. It's going to be a source of wealth. It's going to be a source of tools, as we are talked about. Egypt, because of the Bronze Age collapse, the BAC, all right, they're going to move out of this area and leave the copper mines really unprotected. They're going to stop mining there and pull back into the actual land of Egypt, which is going to leave this area, this very wealthy area, open to anybody. And guess who's going to move in? Midianites. They're like, hey, where did everyone go? They were actually used by the Egyptians as miners, okay? And so once the Egyptians left, they kind of set up shop, like, we're in charge now. You know, look at me. I am the captain now. Anyway? All right. And so there is going to be a tent shrine, kind of like a tabernacle, okay, that is going to be set up here. And there's going to be a lot of artifacts that are going to be taken from this area that kind of tell us about who the Midianites were. All right? And this is really why we're doing this, to kind of get a little flavor of who the Midianites were. You know, it's always good. You read about somebody, you know, who were these people? How'd they live? Right? It helps us to kind of give context to our story. All right. They're going to build a tent shrine. The Egyptians are going to leave. They're going to leave this temple, this little shrine that they had built to Hathor. She was a female goddess. She was the goddess of mining, among other things, right? And so the etymology of this is pretty interesting. The goddess Hathor was, you know, she's the goddess of like pleasure and like nice things, right? Like jewelry and stuff like that. And so that's kind of how she became the goddess of mining as well. Well, where do you get all this nice jewelry and stuff? Well, you got to get it out of the ground. So she became the Egyptian goddess of mining. The Midianites, they weren't really into Hathor, so they're going to really set up their own like tabernacle on this space. And so what did they leave us? Well, here's a couple pictures right here. You can see the outline of the foundation of this small little shrine, but the Midianites are going to move in, and they're going to set up their own little shrine to their own god, who, by the way, was named Yahweh. Okay? And so, you know, whether or not they were actually following after the traditions, you know, that God had set down, we're not really sure. But that makes sense. Abraham's, yes, go ahead, Aaron. Moses' father-in-law, yes, absolutely, yes. So there's that connection, right? That's right. And so that's just an interesting connection, right? That in Midian, they were worshiping Yahweh. Now, whether or not, again, it was after, you know, on the things that were prescribed by God, we're not really told. Anyways, they're going to set up a little shrine here, and there's a lot of different, you know, trinkets and jewelry and stuff like that that archaeologists have taken from this site. Primarily, they were a nomadic people, kind of like the Bedouins, all right? But there were different settlements of Midianites that have been found. So I guess like semi-nomadic, you could say, where they would stop for a period of time and then move to another period of time. Now, most likely, there is going to be some type of environmental issue that is going to force the Midianites out of this area, which is already kind of deserty, right? I mean, not kind of. It's like one of the biggest deserts in the world. And they're going to move to, you know, literally greener pastures, right? And lo and behold, oh, there's this land up north to the west. Just, you know, these Israelites, they're not really, they're not strong at all during this time. They're really struggling just to kind of keep a foothold in this land that God had told them it's yours, but they've been struggling for years and years to keep it, and they're getting pressure. And this is a perfect opportunity for the Midianites, another group of people, to come up into the land of Israel, right? So, that sets our stage, right? Questions, comments? All right, let's move along. Let's take a look at this. This is how the story begins. All right, this is the story of Gideon versus the Midianites. And this is how the story in Judges 6, this is from the NIV. And I call this slide the sad state of Israel. And as we read it, we're going to find out, yeah, it's pretty not great, guys, right? So, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hand of the Midianites. So a relatively short period of time, right, compared to other peoples. Like I think for the Philistines, the Israelites and the Philistines were fighting for decades and decades. This is a 7-year period. Because the power of Midian was so oppressive, the Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Okay, again, not great, right? You're in caves, you're in fear for your life. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, remember these guys, right? An ancient enemy of Israel. They're the ones that attacked Israel. The weak in the old, they attacked them when they came out of Egypt. So there was a continual, really blood feud between the Amalekites and the Israelites. So the Amalekites hook up with the Midianites, and they're like, hey, we're on your side, let's go get some stuff. Whenever the Israelites planted the crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza. So they're going all the way to the coastline of Israel, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep, nor cattle, nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count them, or their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out for the Lord for help. So let's just think about this for a second. In the ancient world, as we know, everyone's life was dependent upon their crops, right? Couldn't go down to Shaw's and get rotisserie chicken for $5. Incredible price, by the way, right? You couldn't do that. You couldn't go to, McDonald's and, the dollar menu. Couldn't do that. You couldn't get calories very quick, right? We have cheap, quick calories in this country, and that's a problem. I mean, it's great, but it's also a problem. So anyways, so when they're growing their crops, right about the time of harvest, who's coming in? The Midianites are. And so their whole livelihood, their children's lives, their families' lives, they're being taken away. And they're taking everything. All of these settlements that Israel has worked so hard to set up in the hill country, they've been fighting the Canaanites. They're a thorn in their side. There's constant skirmishes with the Canaanites. Well, who shows up? This massive army of Midianites and Amalekites. And they're taking everything to the point where they're hiding in caves, or they're building like strongholds up in the hill country, okay? It wasn't a great time for the Israelites. It was a very oppressive time. And they took everything, right? And I'm sure, we're not told, but if we are told what they did, there's going to be famine in the land. There's going to be deaths of family members and of children. There's going to be oppression. There's going to be slavery. Don't think for a second that the Midianites aren't going to come in here and, if they're taking sheep and cattle and stuff like that, all your livestock and all your grain, guess what else they're taking? You, right? They don't kill you. They're taking you and your family to enslave them, to sell them at the slave markets, right? The slave traders. Who knows? You could be taken from the land of Israel and sold down into Arabia or up north into modern-day Turkey. Who knows, right? So there's a fact of life during this time, okay? And so that's why, the chapter, these verses end, this prelude, right? Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help, right? And isn't that true, a lot of times in our lives as well? They were doing their own thing. Remember, every man did what was right in their own eyes? They thought they had it all figured out, but here comes the Midianites. And they can't do it by their own hand. They just didn't have the military power. We're going to find out actually they did have the military power, but they didn't believe in themselves. In fact, Gideon really isn't going to believe in himself either, right? He's going to keep on asking God for more signs like, ooh, yeah, that was great, okay. Well, maybe one more sign. Okay, that was great, maybe one more sign, right? And I think we can all, we can relate to Gideon. Certainly I can, right? You're given this big task, and all of a sudden self-doubt starts creeping in like, am I up for it? Do I have it? Are people going to follow me? Can I take on these guys? I don't know, right? And God understood that, and that's why he's going to be patient with Gideon. He never gets mad at Gideon for Gideon having some of this self-doubt and wanting more from God. Like, oh, I need a little bit more. Right? God never says, hey, knock it off. Where's your faith? He helps him out. And in fact, in the Hebrews 11th chapter, guess who's listed as a man of faith? Gideon. Gideon is, the writer of Hebrews says, I don't have enough time to get into Gideon and these other people, right? But he is mentioned, right? But his faith wasn't this kind of rock-solid faith that we think of people in the ancient world, or ancient Israelites, people that we esteem. It wasn't, right? He struggled with it a little bit. And I think we can take some comfort in that. There's going to be times in our lives when, our faith isn't rock solid. When we maybe are going through a trial, a big thing that we have to deal with, right? And let's think of Gideon. There's a lot of lessons there. Okay, so not great. So what does God do? Well, the first thing that he does, we're told, is, without looking at it, he's going to send a prophet to them. We're not told who this prophet is. He's not given a name. He's a prophet of God. And he says, and he sends them and says, hey, he reminds the people of the great things that were done by God. I'm the one that led you out of Egypt, right? I'm the God. Why aren't you trusting in me? I gave you kind of the precepts and the law to follow, but you're not following it. And so we're not told what Israel's reaction to it was, but it kind of sets us up now for the story of Gideon. Gideon was from the tribe of, anyone know? Manasseh. Thank you, Brother Gordon. Yes. From the tribe of Manasseh, one of the larger tribes up in the central northern part of what is going to be Israel eventually. Okay? Manasseh had considerable influence in Israel, along with Ephraim. The two sons of Joseph, right, are actually going to have this rivalry, like a sibling rivalry, to put it into terms that we can understand. But Ephraim kind of wanted the control of Israel, and so did Manasseh. We're going to see some of that contention in this story as well. An angel is going to appear to Gideon, right? Now, in looking for some clip art for this, there's a couple clip arts of an angel with giant wings, talking to Gideon. But the story, it talks about, there was he was an angel, but he looked like a man, okay? Gideon would have known straight away that it was an angel of God if he had, 10-foot wingspan on, right? So, now this is interesting. During this time, the angel is going to appear to Gideon while he was threshing wheat, right? He's doing the thing, the widowing of the wheat, whatever it is. I've never done it before. Again, 99-cent loaf of bread is very easy to get. But he's hiding it in the wine press, okay? So the Midianites weren't, they'd come up and just take whatever they want. So, a wine press, I don't have a picture of it, but you can cover up a wine press, it's where you press over the grapes to make wine, whatever. But he would cover that up to hide it. And so this kind of shows you the state of Israel at this time. Even Gideon, who was a mighty warrior, the angel even says, he greets them as, hey, hello, mighty warrior. And Gideon's like, who are you talking to? Gideon is very humble when he first talks to the angel. Let's look at this. Yeah, so verse 13 of the 6th chapter of Judges is interesting. Verse 12, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said, the Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Right? You're a mighty warrior. And Gideon said unto him, O my Lord, if the Lord be with us, why then is all this befallen us? And where be all his miracles which our fathers told us of, saying, did not the Lord bring us up out of Egypt? But now the Lord hath forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites. So, it's like a legit question by Gideon, right? Gideon is a faithful individual, and he says, why is this happening to us? Where are all these miracles that were supposedly happening? Now, let's keep our hand here in Judges, the 6th chapter, and let's look at a psalm that deals with this. There's a psalm that actually deals, not with the life of Gideon, but with what Gideon is asking. right? This internal questioning of why these things are happening. In the 44th Psalm, so this is how the 44th Psalm begins. Now keep in mind what Gideon had just, asked the angel, like, why are these things happening? He says, "We have heard with our ears, O God. Our fathers have told us what work thou didst in their days, in the times of old. How thou hast driven out the heathen with thy hand and planted them. How thou didst afflict the people and cast them out. For they got land in their possession by their own sword. Neither did their arm save them, but thy right hand and thine arm, and the light of thy countenance, because thou hast a favor unto them." So he's reminiscing about past events. We've heard about all of these great things that you have done, God. All the miracles. You brought us into this land. And so, in verse 9, "But thou hast cast off and put us to shame, and goest not forth with our armies. Thou makest us to turn back from the enemy, and they which hate us spoil for themselves." Here's something right here, verse 11. Paul's going to use this verse, right? "Thou hast given us like sheep appointed for meat, and hath scattered us among the heathen." Right? And so this is really what Gideon's saying. You know what? How come you're not helping us? And so he didn't understand at that time that God was actually helping him through Gideon. But Gideon didn't look at himself as a savior. He actually is going to say, and I think he's kind of being extra humble here. He's saying, I'm from the least tribe of Israel, and my father's house is nothing. But in fact, we're going to see that Gideon's house and Gideon's father had some influence over the people. In fact, most likely Gideon's father, Joash, was a chieftain, a small little chieftain of this area. Okay, not great, right? But Gideon he said, I don't have this. I don't have the skills to do this at all. So Gideon is hesitant to believe that he has been appointed by God to be the savior of Israel, right? Let's look at his words here. He says, verse 15, he says, "O my Lord, wherewith shall I save Israel? Behold, my family is poor in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house." Okay. And the Lord said unto him, "Surely I will be with thee, and thou shalt smite the Midianites as one man." So God totally dismisses that, right? I'm very poor in Manasseh. Yeah. God isn't, he's almost saying to he's saying to Gideon, I don't care about any of that. You're the guy, right? It's the same thing with David, right? God looks on the inward man, not on the outward. So, Gideon wants a sign. And so he brings out food to the angel, and the angel touches it, and it is completely consumed with fire. And Gideon is afraid. He now knows for sure that this guy is an angel of God, and he's scared. Now he's scared he's going to die because he says, "I have seen an angel of God." And God says, "Listen, don't worry about it. You're not going to die." Okay? And this is how it's left. So, God tells him the first thing that he needs to do is to go and destroy the Baal grove that his father had set up, which is interesting. Because Gideon's father, his name Joash, means Yahweh has given, right? And so that in and of itself kind of shows us this tension between the Canaanites, right, and the Israelites. Joash has a name that is exalting God, right, Yahweh. But he has set up a grove to Baal and to his wife Ashtaroth. Okay, this is the grove. These were very common in the land of Canaan, right? They would find a place with trees and stuff like that, like a nice natural setting, and they would set up an altar to Baal, and they would also set up what's called an Ashtoreth pole. And I have a picture in the next slide showing this. But it was like a handcrafted wooden idol or kind of like tree that was made. And so Ashtaroth represented, she was a goddess, and she was the consort or the wife of Baal. Now, there are some inscriptions where Yahweh has a wife called Ashtaroth as well, right? And so that kind of gives us a little hint as well into the kind of the corruption that was going on, particularly in these settlements, in these Jewish or Hebrew settlements. They now have Ashtaroth married to Yahweh. And there were all these different groves and places of worship that are actually going to last up in really time of Hezekiah and Josiah, right? They're going to last a long time. In fact, Manasseh, one of the wicked kings in Judah, is going to set up an Ashtaroth pole in the temple, right? And so these practices are still going on hundreds of years after the time of the judges. So he goes in at night. He brings 10 of his servants. And so if you had 10 servants back in the ancient world, you're doing okay, right? You had 10 people that were working for you. Hi, guys. Good to see everyone. Is it 10 o'clock start? Okay. He has 10 servants. He goes out at nighttime because he's afraid of his family and he's afraid of the townspeople. And he goes in and he just cuts down all the trees. He cuts down the Ashtoreth pole. He uses the Ashtoreth pole to light to give this sacrifice to God. He's going to offer a bull right here to Yahweh now. And so what Gideon really is showing the townspeople is Yahweh has supremacy over all. He is the God. Baal is gone. Ashtaroth gone. We're dedicated to Yahweh now. Right? And so that's the very first thing that Gideon does before he goes out and try to gathers all the people to Midian. He cleanses his town. Right? And so there's a religious revival first before there can be kind of a gathering of the people to go to war against Midian. They had to cleanse themselves. They had to return to God. And this was a physical act to show the townspeople, right, that no more are we following after Baal. And so, they get up in the morning and they do a little investigation, Scripture tells us. And, lo and behold, they find out it was Gideon who had done this, right? Most likely one of his 10 servants, was blabbing to somebody, right? Couldn't keep the secret. But anyways, the townspeople want him dead. Like, he's going to die for this. And so Joash steps in and says, no one's going to kill anybody. If Baal is such a powerful God, he can take vengeance by himself on Gideon. Okay, that was pretty clever, right? And so Gideon is going to be given a new name called, anyone know? Remember? Jerubbaal, right, very good, yeah. And it's it means that Baal will contend. In other words, they named Gideon, Jerubbaal as, Baal's going to get you one of these days type of thing. Or you can look at it as that Gideon was contending against Baal, right? He is now contending or he is fighting against Baal. So, after this event, Gideon is going to send messengers all over Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, Naphtali, I believe, and say, hey, we got to have a big meeting. Let's all get together. Let's all gather around, and let's figure out what we're doing with the Midianites. No one had stood up until this time to do something because they were scattered, right? There wasn't a cohesion. There wasn't a centralized government during the time of Judges. We know that. Right? Every tribe did what it wants to do, and then during times of trouble, like kind of a warlord or a tribe or a chieftain would emerge. And this is kind of the cycle that's going on here. There was no centralized government. There's not going to be a centralized government really until the time of David. David is going to be the first king that is going to centralize the power base out of Jerusalem. But before that time, it was willy-nilly. So, big gathering. What are we going to do with the Midianites? Now, before we get into that, here on the left-hand side is an Ashtaroth pole, okay, or this depiction of it. We don't really have, they didn't last. They're made out of wood. They're all rotten now. But anyway, so that would be with the, in the grove, with the altar of Baal, and Baal right there, he is the god. He's the god of war. He's the god of thunderstorms. You know, he was the most powerful god in the pantheon of gods in the Canaanites, right? Okay. So what part of Israel are we dealing with? Well, it's in the kind of the central north of Israel. Okay, and this is the area you can see from the map up there. You have Manasseh. Ephraim is down in the south, and up north in Zebulun, Naphtali. This is very close, brothers and sisters, to the area where Barak and Deborah were. Okay, this is the area right here. So we're dealing with kind of the central north area. We're not going to be dealing with the south of Israel until like the time of Samson, right, in the time of Judges. Anyways, and so this is what we're talking about here. And we'll get into these different, see that blue line right there? That's kind of the path that Gideon is going to take when he chases after the Midianites. Okay? All right, so very quickly, running out of time. Gideon calls all the tribes together up in the north together. Hey, guys, we got to take care of this. So thousands and thousands of people show up. They show up, and God tells Gideon, look, there's too many people for this purpose, right? I want you to recognize my power. I don't want you or the Israelites to think that they did it on their own because of their own power and the might of their own armies, right? So we want 300 people. And so they chose the people by drinking the water, right? Anyone that went down to the stream to drink water and drank like a dog, right out of the water, see you later, go home. Oh, before they did this, by the way, Gideon is going to ask anybody, hey, if you are afraid, if you really don't want to be here, no problem, see you later. And thousands of people left. They're like, okay, thank you. And so we're whittling it down right now. Anyone that cupped their hands and brought water to their mouth, you're in. 300. You're part of the 300. And so, the scripture doesn't tell us why this particular event was used, right? But I've heard some interesting things on why God chose the certain people that brought up their hands was lapping like a dog, right? That's actually what Scripture says. They lap the water like a dog. And I think it shows, like people that drank the water, they used their hands, right? So it's kind of like a very human thing, right? You're bringing water up. Your eyes also are up like this. They're not down like that, like an animal, right? Your head is not down here. Like if you're dealing with an army and people, you want to bring the water up to you to look around, to always be alert. Okay, and I think there's some spiritual significance in that as well. Do we want to, do we debase ourselves like animals, right? Or, God has made man upright, but he has sought out many inventions, right? He wants us to be upright. We're his greatest, creation. Are we bringing the water up to us like this? Are we alert at all times? Or are we just kind of giving into our basic animal needs and just kind of lapping like a dog, right? Dogs were unclean, by the way, in ancient Israel, right? Dogs really are never mentioned as man's best friend. They always have a connotation, as like dogs eating like, the bones of Jezebel, right? The dogs ate, so I'm sure there were packs of wild dogs during this time, right? And they were looked down upon. All right. So, yes, Jason.
Another interesting point on that as well is the way that we intake the Word of God.
Okay.
So it's that constant, we are alert, but it's when you're taking the water from your hand, you have a steady intake of the Word of God, which is very helpful to our lives.
For sure, yeah, absolutely. A steady intake of God's Word, yeah, for sure. And again, that makes sense, but we're not told directly like why this was used, right? And so I think it's interesting kind of look at some of this stuff, like why did God use that particularly, like the drinking of the water, But it's very interesting. Now, still, all this stuff is happening. So now Gideon has 300, like they're like elite soldiers. They have a special purpose. But he still wants more confirmation. And so there's 2 times that he's going to use a fleece, a sheep's fleece, right? The first time, the ground near the fleece is completely dry, has no dew on it. All the dew is in the fleece. And he wrings it out afterward, and all this water comes out, right? Like a cup of water. And so Gideon's like, wow, that's incredible, right? God just performed a miracle for Gideon. Gideon asked for this to happen. God did it for him. And Gideon says, oh, wait a minute. Okay, let's try it this way. Let's have dew all around and the fleece be dry, right? God does that for him as well. So Gideon always needed kind of these affirmations that what was happening, God was with him, right? He didn't need it once. He didn't need it twice. He didn't need it 3 times. He's going to need 4 different events to finally convince Gideon, let's go. And the biggest one was this: he snuck down with his servant into the camp of the Midianites, right? And he's listening in. And these guys are talking about a dream that they had. And it was like this weird dream about a loaf of bread, a loaf of barley bread comes into the camp, right? It tumbles into the camp and it knocks down all the tents. And they interpreted this dream as, oh, this is this rebel guy, Gideon. He's going to destroy the Midianites. And so Gideon hears them talking. And it's this event that finally convinces Gideon that, oh, I'm on the right track. God is with me. And so, long story short, they cover up their torches, right, with like a clay jar, and it's lit. The top of it is lit, inside. It's getting oxygen in from the top, but it's covered up. And so they all come, and they kind of surround the Midianites. And then at the time, Gideon blows a trumpet, right? And they smash their torches, and now all of the kind of the surrounding hills are all lit up with these torches, right? And they're screaming, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, right? There's this racket. It's the middle of the night. Now the Midianites, let's just think psychologically, the Midianites, they're in a foreign country, right? There's all kinds of different peoples, right, that they don't know about. Yeah, it's like this group of people, but there's Amalekites, there's other peoples, there's Midianites. So they go into a panic mode, and they start to run, they're afraid, they start fighting each other. And so this 300 is going to push the Midianites down into an area where there are other fighters, right? There's other fighters that are waiting for this, and they kind of trap the Midianites, and so it's a bloodbath. And in fact, Gideon tells the Ephraimites too, hey, block off the path in Jordan, right? They're coming. And so they do that, and boom, God saves the children of Israel by Gideon in his faith. And so the kings of Midian are going to be killed. Ephraim is going to grab a couple of the generals and kill them, that type of thing. But there's going to be internal fighting, and I'll leave it at this. Ephraimites are like, hey, why didn't you call us first? Right? So there's this tension between Manasseh and the tribe of Ephraim. And also there's going to be a couple towns that Gideon is going to ask. He's going to pursue after the Midianites, and he's going to stop at Succoth. Right? And he says, hey, guys, can we have some food? Like, I've been traveling all this time to get these guys. And they're like, no, we're not getting anything. He goes to the next town, Penuel, I think it was, and he says the same thing. Hey, can we have some supplies? We're pretty hungry. And they're like, no, you're not getting anything. And so, Gideon, they were still afraid of the Midianites. They didn't want to help Gideon. But anyways, Gideon is going to be victorious, and he's going to come back, and he's going to punish those 2 towns. So I guess what I'm trying to get at is, it wasn't all like roses internally in Israel. They were fighting each other as well. So they have external enemies and internal enemies as well. And then lastly, this is kind of just a schematic of what actually happened. and it's pretty good. Where Israel is in the red right here, they attack, and then the other, the Midianites take off, that type of thing. So God is going to use this individual for His purpose. And He always uses different people with flaws, with strengths, that type of thing. And that should be a number one lesson. Number two, God was patient with Gideon. Gideon wasn't gung-ho about it. He needed some encouragement from God, and God gave it to him. And he never he never got mad at him. It's kind of like with Abraham and God. God's going to destroy the whole city. And slowly but surely, Abraham gets him down to 10 people. Right? That's a great exchange, isn't it? I think the same thing is going on. You can see the character and the love of God, the long-suffering nature of God in dealing with these people, in dealing with men and women of faith. Okay? He gives people chances. He's given us chances, right? And He's still there with us, being merciful, being compassionate, patient, and long-suffering with us. And we should take comfort from that. Questions?